Chapter 5 Rise of Tears. As the sun slipped beneath the billowing blanket of clouds to the west, its radiance set the mists aglow with tendrils of fuchsia and lavender. A few resilient rays escaped the shroud to cast a soft rosy hue across the stone and sand of the lower steps, a deceptively peaceful aura that masked the savageness at its heart. Amidst that paradox of light and stone rode 4 disheveled travelers, mute witness to the deceit of dusk's mantle. Asan rode in the rear, oblivious to the illusion around him. Adrenaline and panic had maintained him for a short while, but as the danger fell behind and his heart slowed, the full impact of everything that happened came crashing in. He retreated into his mind, leaving Alewa to manage their journeys without him. Flashes of memories, the clash of battle dying cries, and even Durin's voice muttering words bizarre and out of place swirled in chaotic onslaught within Asan's head. He couldn't make sense of any of it. His life had become a desperate search for answers, only interrupted by a repetitive series of escalating horrors. Why was it all happening? Why was it all happening now? The only obvious answer suggested it was all connected somehow. But if it was, the delicate web that linked these seemingly unrelated events was far too fine and elusive for him to detect. But if everything was linked in some mysterious way, then it all came back to one thing. Durin. Durin knew the land was in danger and was guiding Asan to fix it. He also intimated something about Asan's birthright. Made him able to do so. What if the birthright was the reason Archbishop Azamir wanted them? The thought chilled him to the bone. Asan was astounded when the Archbishop let them go so easily, but the way the man watched his father as they left stuck with him. Asan once saw Briarcat eyeing an escaping sandrunner that way. The bird deftly escaped capture and was speeding away at a blinding pace. The large feline just watched. In that glare, the sentiment was clear: run all you want. You're already mine. Just when the bird appeared free, a blur of tan death collided with it. When the dust settled, a second Briarcat was dragging the carcass back to its mate. Never once had the first cat wavered. It knew the game was already up. Like the cat, Azamir's stare never doubted the eventual acquisition of his desire. He knew the Ka-Ra would be his. He just needed to be patient. Only when Asan's father vanished into the dark alley did his eyes falter. Then they had turned to the sun with the same hunger. It was brief, as Asan was already fleeing with Durin, but the promise was certain. He would have them both. It all began to make sense little as Asan thought back on the encounter. Azamir didn't merely seek the Conchogal, he watched from his veranda, while the 2 guards were slain without raising his voice. Perhaps he even would have been fine had his father fallen in battle, but when both Asan and his father joined the fray side by side, against seemingly insurmountable odds, the Archbishop changed tactics. The risk of losing both prizes must have been too great for him. There was something about them that was important, and like a puzzle piece fitting into place, Asan found his likely connection. The Archbishop wanted the direct descendants of the Ayun Ka. The name brought clarity to the whirling chaos of his mind. His unanswered questions on that very topic returned with a bold, empty longing. Ayun Ka, the first seeker in Asan's direct ancestor, was the secret at the core. It was said most Conchogal carried some small portion of the first seeker's blood. But the lineage was truest with the line of the Ka-Ra. It was the only thing about Asan and his father he could imagine having importance to the Archbishop. He could think of no other plausible reason Azamir would have gone to such lengths, yet relent so easily when their lives were threatened. But why? What purpose did they serve for him? There were only 2 people Asan knew who could answer those questions: Durin and his father. If he went to Durin, he could be waiting all night for him to get to the point. But the other option wasn't much more promising. If every Ka was told these secrets when they entered manhood, his father was no exception. He was certainly an easier source for the answers, but it posed new challenges and apprehensions. As the Ka-Ra, he was an easy leader to speak with. As Hazan, he was a concerned and loving father, always willing to listen to his son and give advice. But things were different after today. They advanced to a new and unfamiliar relationship. By assuming his responsibilities as Ka, Asan came into contention with his father's authority. Once might have been forgiven, but the day was a disaster for the Ka-Ra, and it all started when Asan questioned his decision regarding Avar. Asan knew things could never return to the way they were. He'd learned too much to do so now, both about himself as well as these new rising threats. He learned something about his father today as well. The great Ka-Ra, his father and champion, was not infallible, and his fallacies left him ill-equipped against the changes taking place in their world. The consequences of Asan's silence were too great anymore to do nothing. He wasn't arrogant enough to think himself the correct choice to lead, and his father was leader by right. But he couldn't sit on his sides any longer. He would speak his mind, as was his new right as Ka, even if doing so irrevocably altered their relationship. Hasan's new insight into the Ka-Ra left him unable to predict whether the man's pride would allow him to accept the change, however. Considering his behavior back in the city, it was clear he wouldn't take challenge lightly. Hasan supposed it didn't matter, there was no going back. The need for those answers restored a semblance of order within Hasan's mind. He was set. Ayun Ka was the foundational mystery of all his questions. Until he knew the truth, he would never be able to sort out the rest. The final choice to speak to his father brought him back from the prison of his thoughts into reality. The world had changed while Hasan was absent. Twilight had faded into darkness, and the nocturnal sounds of the highlands rose in chorus. The calls of sandrunners shrieked out to their flocks, perhaps alerting them to a feast of sleeping lizards between the rocks. Briar-cats huffed in the distance, warning rivals from their territory. The mournful crooning sighs of cliff sirens filled the voids in between. Most lowlanders found their song sorrowful and deeply unnerving, but this was the melody that sang Hasan to sleep since he was a baby. For a short time there had also been his mother's lullabies, but a fever took her when he was young. Since that early age the highlands became the mother who sang him to sleep, and nurtured him into adulthood. The night seemed darker than ever before to Hasan after everything he'd faced. The safe familiarity of his homeland was forever broken. Towering rock spires and twisting boulders loomed ominously around him, dark, indistinguishable shadows in the night. Everywhere he turned lurked potential threats. He tried to calm his fears, but knew somewhere out there lurked the second Briar-cat, waiting to strike its unsuspecting prey. "Welcome back." Dern had apparently been riding a short way off while Hasan sorted through his inner turmoil. Not even a minute had passed since his return, and the old man was reining in beside Ilewa. "It looked like you needed some time to yourself." "What I really need are answers," Hasan snapped, and a little more harshly than intended, but his emotions were still too raw to allow for any show of remorse. "I will provide you what answers I can, but I fear the confluence of events is beyond even my abilities to unravel. How much of this is your doing?" There was an accusation in his tone. "Ever since your little lesson this morning, the world is spinning out of control. What are you up to?" Hasan felt slightly guilty for asking it. There was no possible way Dern could have orchestrated the day's events. But there was more behind the things he was teaching Hasan than he let on, and if the day's events taught him anything, there was more to the old man than meets the eye. "If only I had such control over the world." There was regret in Dern's words, a forlorn longing for the power to change the wrongs he'd seen. "Perhaps if I did, our fallen comrades would still be with us. Their bodies wouldn't remain with those fanatics denied their proper rights. Perhaps your father would have been convinced of the dangers I now impart to you. But alas, that power is not mine to wield. I must strive with the meager tools I have to do what is right." He sighed deeply then, purging himself of his discontent. "Perhaps I've gone about this all wrong. Sometimes I suspect I am too clever for my own good." Hasan didn't know how to respond to this unexpected sight of his mentor. A storm of emotions raged through his mind at the moment, and he still felt the burning need to ride forward and approach his father about his heritage and the encounter with Azmir. But Dern's vulnerability gave him pause. He looked at the old man questioningly, urging him to continue. "I admit to playing my hand at manipulation, but not in the ways you implicate. I may not be able to direct events to my liking." Dern paused for a moment as he contemplated his next words. "But I can forge a tool to deal with the dangers I believe our people face. Sadly, your father wasn't composed of the attributes required to cope with the coming challenges. His rigidity and biases prevent the necessary adjustments to make him ready. But you're bright and compassionate. You have a cunning about you that far exceeds the limits of the Ka-Ra. It's these things that brought you to my attention. That made me see in you a potential for the conjugal I never saw as possible with your father. It is that potential to which I have dedicated my scheming and manipulation. You are the tool I would wield against these threats, if you are but ready for the responsibilities. But why now? Why are you all of a sudden interested in what I do or how I act?" He was a bit startled and slightly offended that he was the object of the old man's manipulations, but he agreed with Dern's assessment of his father. Yet why did it suddenly become imperative today to push Hasan into conflict with his father? How did it tie in with the events in Anhara? "You think this only just began this morning?" Dern responded, between laughter. "Young Ka, I've had a hand in your education and development since you could barely talk. I have guided you in some fashion throughout the majority of your life in the hopes that one day you would become a worthy Ka, and eventually rise to be an even greater Ka-Ra." The laughter stopped, and he took a much more somber tone. "Circumstances, however—" He paused. as well as the stubbornness of a certain young man, forced my hand. What circumstances? Hassan resisted the urge to respond to the stubbornness comment. Dern appeared to read into his submission and smiled knowingly. With the Dahara fast approaching and your absence preventing the necessary education to prepare, I had already decided I must intervene. This morning's little chat was planned for some time. I just needed the right moment. But that wasn't all of it, was it? Unfortunately not, Dern replied. As we discussed on our ride, the steady decline of the Highlands has been happening for some time. Several years, I would estimate. But something has changed. It's accelerated, and I fear our window of opportunity is quickly closing. For you to have any chance of changing our fate, there are things you need to know. It's because of this that I approached you with more urgency. As for the events that occurred afterward, I had no forewarning. In fact, I'm at a loss to explain it. But we wouldn't have been there to witness any of it had you not responded so quickly to our talk this morning. It was your decision to assume your responsibilities as Ka that led to us joining your father. Had we not gone with them, your father may have never returned. Perhaps that is the first proof you're the one your people need. I have a terrible feeling things are going to get much worse for us, whether I step up or not. As do I, young Ka, Dern replied. Then everyone just must be made ready. Not just me. If the destiny knowing certain things, perhaps it's time our entire tribe learns of them as well. Your father will not appreciate a break from traditions. Something like that is certain to cause even more animosity between you two. How can I do what's needed if I am hindered by my father? If an obstacle is too difficult to move against, then you must move around it, Dern offered. If he commands me not to do something, I can't very well go against his wishes. He's still Ka-Ra, Hassan countered. Then you don't give him the chance to refuse you. You are a man now, Hassan. As your 16th name day, you were imbued with all the powers and rights the title of Ka bears. Tradition and law ordain you with authority among your people now. Whilst traditionally, most Kas would never consider acting without the blessing of their father, there's nothing in the law that prevents it. So go behind his back? Hassan questioned. That accomplishes nothing. He still holds supreme authority. He's Ka-Ra. If I do anything he disagrees with, he'll simply override it. His word is law. And how would he convince the people his heir is worthy if he countermands your authority? He wants you to assume your role as Ka. He wants the people to respect you as their future leader. He may not like what that means when you actually do, but it will be very difficult to refuse you once you've already acted and still save face. There was a cunning twinkle in Dern's eye as he laid out the basis of the scheme. Perhaps, Hassan conceded, the argument had merit, but he was unsure if he wanted to challenge his father that much. The Ka-Ra disappointed him today, and there were definite signs his father was too stuck in his ways. But he owed it to him as family to give it a chance. He'd already decided to speak with him. Now there was just more he needed to discover. Not yet, though, Hassan cautioned. I have to speak with him and see for myself. However, I don't doubt what you say. If you would consider how we might bring this information to the rest of the tribe, perhaps it will assist me in making my decision. As you wish, young Ka. He said it with formality and deference he never granted to Hassan before, and by doing so he reinforced the emerging mantle of authority in his pupil. With the slightest manipulation he stoked the embers of change to burn more fiercely until the young man at last grew to be the leader his people needed. Hassan was about to coax Alewa forward to meet with his father when, as an afterthought, he asked, He wants the direct descendants of Ayin Ka, doesn't he? He wants my father and me. I suspect that's the Archbishop's goal, Dern answered starkly. To what purpose I cannot guess, but I fear his reasons for hunting you are dark indeed. That was magic, wasn't it? Hassan continued. Real magic, not the tricks they do for coins in the cities. What he did to that soldier, he used magic to kill him, didn't he? I can't say for sure, but it certainly appeared so. There was a hint of foreboding in his words. I thought as much. Hassan considered the implications as the dread of what that might mean set in. But it doesn't change anything. There isn't much we can do about it either way, and right now I must speak with my father. Hassan could see the familiar changes in the landmarks from the wind-swept boulders of the coastal cliffs to the larger towering formations of stone that grew more numerous towards the outer rim's interior. They came a long way since escaping Inhara. They traversed miles of the ladder's winding course, progressing east towards the pass to the ridgelands above. That destination was still several days' travel away, however. Their more immediate goal was to intercept the tribe. The camp would have come down quickly once the order to move was given. Once loaded, the Conchogal could move at a pace that would outshame other caravans. Of course, that was partly due to the strength and hauling capacity of Dahar, but even that advantage was just a complement to the mastery of nomadic life their people were born to for generations. There was no telling how far they traveled while the events of this port city transpired. Kahrahazan rode in the lead with Cho'Gath, apparently unconcerned with how far Asan and Dern had fallen behind. Both were embroiled in a heated conversation, and perhaps that was the reason for their lack of vigilance. Asan heeled Alewa forward, indifferent to any offense he might engender by interrupting, and rode up beside his father. "We dishonor their sacrifice. We don't return for their bodies," Hazan argued, not even acknowledging his son's arrival. "When I return to my people, I intend to lead a war party back to for our fallen, or burn the city to the ground." "You dishonor all of the Contra Gaul if you lead our people to their death to sate your injured pride," Asan interrupted. He knew he shouldn't antagonize his father if he truly hoped to get any information, but a part of him rankled at the thought of the death that would ensue from such a poor decision. He was still new to this, but the potential for unanticipated danger seemed blatantly clear to him. "You are still a child, Asan. You know very little of the ways of war or honor," Hazan replied, much more calmly than what Asan expected in response to his challenge, although the lack of bite and demeanor was more than made up for in the rebuff of his words. "I became a man on my 16th name day, father. I'm a child no longer, but a Ka of the Contra Gaul by right." Asan tempered the hurt from the assault with calm, controlled defiance. "I admit I know little of war or even honor, but I know what I saw. That man, the Archbishop, he snuffed a man's life out with a thought. What more is he capable of? Could he decimate a return force as easily? What honor do we gain if we charge back to our deaths?" "No disrespect, chieftain," Cho'Gath put in before the Ka robber could respond, "but the Ka speaks wisely. My blades are always ready for blood, but how do we fight something like that? I've never faced fear in battle before, but that man terrified me. I'd die for you and for our honor, but what honor is there in a natural death like that?" The arms-master appeared deeply unsettled by his admission. In all his years, he never showed a hint of hesitance when faced with battle. But now that he'd faced an opponent who could instill in him with fear, his bloodlust remained subdued. "I appreciate the honesty of your counsel, brave one. It can't be simple admission to make." Hazan appeared affected by the strong man's admission of fear, too. It was possible the truth was all too close to his own inner turmoil. "Perhaps I let my emotions drive me too much in this matter. We will discuss it before the council when we return to see what their assessment is." "Your wisdom in this is great, chieftain," Cho'Gath answered with a deferential bow of his head. He locked eyes with Asan as if he were educating the boy in the ways of adults in honor with his statement and behavior. There was a hint of offense in his eyes, perhaps in response to the tone that Asan took with the Kara. He might agree with the Ka's wisdom, but he was intent on conveying his displeasure in silence. "I would like a moment alone with the Ka," Hazan announced. "See if you can track our people's progress. Surely we are nearing the camp." "At once, Kara!" Cho'Gath spurred his mount forward, casting a final glance back at Asan to grin. He likely expected this talk to reassert the proper hierarchy and reprimand the young Ka for his presumptuousness. "You've risen above yourself today, Asan," his father smiled scoldingly. "What's gotten into you? Why do you insist on challenging my authority?" Asan paused to think before responding. His father was approaching the matter from the aspect of parent to son. In that relationship, Asan had all the command, but their relationship had been altered by Asan's rise to manhood, and today's grievances had nothing to do with their familial relationship. It was spurred by his acceptance and assertion of his newly bequeathed authority. If he allowed his father to diminish his role to a child in this conversation, he would get nowhere. First and foremost, Asan needed his father to recognize his position as Ka and all the rights and responsibilities that came with it. Only then would he feel his voice mattered in dealing with the problems of Contra Gaul faced. He was unsure if he was cunning enough to manage it, or for that matter, if his father would even be willing to accept the change of roles. But he surprised himself several times today already and decided it was time to roll the dice once more. "I've only risen as high as my rightful rank and tradition allow, Ka-Ra. I am Ka Asan, and that means more now that I'm a man." Hazan chuckled low and deep. "So after months of hiding from your people and your responsibilities, you wish to be granted the respect and honor due your rank? You presume too much, Asan. Rank and authority aren't handed over so easily. You bear the burden of your past faults and poor decisions. Those faults will weigh what level of authority you might bear. You can't just demand to be respected as Ka when you decide it's no longer beneath you." He paused for a moment as if weighing the harshness of his words, then continued on a slightly different course. "Don't get me wrong, Asan. I'm proud you finally accepted your birthright. You bring honor to our family and to our people when you stand up against the dangers our tribe faces. But you will cease this incessant need to challenge my authority. I am your father. I am the Ka-Ra. Your words are wise, Ka-Ra, Hasan responded, while biting back the emotions from his voice. He wanted to yell back and accuse his father of his own faults. But that would only reinforce his father's view of him as still a child. His entire life he was the benefactor of Durn's tutelage. He learned well the ability to ignore slights. He learned even better how to use the words to strike back at insults without ever resorting to anger or screaming. We must all bear the burdens of our past faults and poor decisions, he continued, crafting his words with cunning intent. All of us, from peasant to king, from Ka to Ka-Ra, for even a chieftain must face criticism for poorly made choices, especially in circumstances as dire as we face today. You go too far, Hasan roared. You know nothing of what it takes to lead our people and keep them safe. You know little of the world and its dangers beyond what that old fool teaches you, and until you do, you have no right to question my decisions. Hasan didn't expect the conversation to become heated this quickly. It had never risen to this level in past arguments, but perhaps that was because he had never approached his father from a position of authority, not far removed from his own. He stood only slightly below the Ka-Ra in rank now, and by forcing the matter to be handled from a point of near equals, he must have tapped into a sensitive area for the Ka-Ra. It was growing increasingly clear the only way his father would accept his position as Ka was if Hasan fully agreed with him unquestioningly. Disagreements would never be taken as anything but a challenge, no matter how tactfully or respectfully he approached his father. Cunning wasn't going to work. Hasan realized he might as well come out in defiance from the start, because either way his father would brook no dissent. I know enough, Hasan began brashly. I know enough to realize you made a mistake allowing that spy Avar to escape. He's with the Archbishop, I guarantee it. Anything that spawns from that man is a danger to us. Our people will pay for that mistake. Hasan was burning with need to unleash the full list of his father's failings this day, and once the dam broke he couldn't stop. You would have ignored those poor orphans out of a lack of compassion, and were it not for them, we wouldn't have been warned of the soldiers. You would have gone to meet your source despite warnings that it would be a trap. Without Borwell's assistance, we might have never escaped. Yet you treated him disgracefully. You would have challenged the soldiers on those ships without even deducing their strength and numbers. Every decision you made in Adhara put us in more danger. The sad reality is, if no one was there to correct you, our people would be without a leader. Hasan was stunned by the shock and anger in his father's eyes. He wondered if anyone had ever questioned his leadership like this before. It was doubtful. And in truth, maybe there was never a need. Maybe he was the type of leader they needed before all of this. He was the type of leader who followed tradition and focused on the well-being of the tribe above all others. Was he capable of changing to face these new challenges? The Order of Light hunting the Conjugal was a challenge never faced before by his people. The withering of the land was an unimaginable crisis. It was possible. No one was prepared to lead through perils such as this. But one issue alone made a big difference. No one could lead the Conjugal through any of it if they refused to accept the reality of the dangers. You say I know nothing of the world or its dangers, while you ignore the very dangers killing our homeland. How will you lead our people if the highlands become uninhabitable? You were warned, and yet you do nothing. Wasn't the way Hasan wanted to breach that topic, but he doubted a different tone would have made a difference. The implication was still there. I knew that's where this was coming from, his father declared as if suddenly understanding some hidden conspiracy. That old fool couldn't get me to believe in his fairy tales, and has decided to fill your head with his senile nonsense and turn you against me. I've seen it for myself, father. He didn't have to tell me tales. I saw the damage. The land is failing. Why else do we spend so much longer sheltering from the winter each year? I don't know if there's anything we can do to stop it, but don't you think we should try? The gods are dead. The old man says so himself, and the Ayun Ka is long gone. Any power in our blood from him is so thin after this many generations it's useless even to contemplate. So if you plan to seek out the greatness lost to save us, good luck. We are the Conjugal, and we shall always seek, for that is our purpose. But as Ka-Ra, I cannot rely on legends and children's stories. I must see to it our people survive. There was a fire to his outburst, but there was also something dark and broken underneath all of it that Hasan had never witnessed. Perhaps that's our true destiny. The Ka-Ra uttered forlornly, more to himself than Hasan. We are cursed to seek forever and never find. It is the curse of having watched a god die that now lingers through every passing generation. Hasan was left speechless. There were numerous points he didn't understand about Ayun Ka, and his father's outburst made some of those inadequacies more clear. But it gave him a sudden revelation. His father didn't refuse to act out of spite or neglect. The problem was much more profound. He didn't try because he didn't believe there was anything he could do. He'd lost faith. Kahra Hazan, a man forged of tradition and honor to one's ancestry, had stopped believing in his very purpose as the leader of the Khan Cho'Gall. The realization shook Hassan to his core, but before he could recover to comment, Cho'Gall rode up. Kahra! I beg forgiveness for interrupting, but there's something you should see. The others? Hassan asked, voice tinged with concern. No. The tracks are getting fresher, but no sign of the tribe yet. This is something else. Something peculiar. Very well, Hassan agreed, then turned to Hassan. As far as I'm concerned, we're done here. But if you insist on playing Ka, then by all means, join us. Perhaps you can regale us with your wisdom some more. Then he rode out to follow Cho'Gall. Hassan was astonished by the sheer pettiness of the comment, but he wouldn't let it prevent him from upholding his duty to his people. Before spurring Alewa forward, Hassan searched for Dern. Unsurprisingly, the sly dog was only a few yards off. It wasn't immediately clear how much he overheard, but the look in his eyes and the nod he gave Hassan suggested he'd witnessed more than enough. Cho'Gall has found something important, Hassan informed the old man. I would like you to join me while we investigate. Your wisdom is valued by your Ka. They rode together in silence, the Ka-Ra and Arms-Master just visible up ahead. Hassan was too overwhelmed by the events that transpired between him and his father to carry on a conversation. Dern chose not to interfere. Everything was changing. Every decision Hassan made, every action he took was altering him in discernible ways. And it wasn't just in the ways others looked at him, but how he looked at himself. The act he played to convince others he was worthy of the title of Ka was becoming less an act and more an embrace of his true self with every decision. He was astounded to find the side of himself hidden within. He just never gave it a chance to come forth. But now that it was awakened, Hassan couldn't imagine going back to how things were. He was quickly realizing the boy who woke this morning resistant to face the world was far removed from the man now riding through the dark expanse of the highlands this night. Hassan was amazed by this new side of himself, but that disbelief was the remnants of an insecure boy who resisted responsibility while hiding in his tent. It faded even now as a new sense of confidence took hold. But where had his hidden potential come from? It seemed obvious once he considered the question. This new Hassan wasn't new at all. It was the culmination of Dern's hard work and tutelage. The games of wit, the hours of lessons, the constant testing and prodding, it was for one purpose, to forge the Hassan he'd become at last. All it required was to give him a purpose, a reason to bring his unrealized talents to bear. An unfamiliar noise alerted Hassan to the eerie silence around them. He was so absorbed in the personal reflection he completely missed the absence of nighttime sounds. Beyond the dull clopping of the Dahar hooves, there wasn't a murmur of life among the shifting sand and the windswept stone. It was as if the creatures of the highlands had fled or gone to ground. But building in the west, and clearly heard, in the absence of other sounds, was a soft wailing howl. It was faint and obscured by distance, but its chilling cadence sent a tremor of panic through Hassan. One of the highlands' brutal winter gales was forming the very reason that the Khan Cho'Gall fled to the coast for the season. These fierce windstorms had grown so powerful, almost nothing could survive the onslaught without protection. This not-so-subtle warning made it abundantly clear. Their time for traveling was drawing dangerously close to ending, and if they were unable to find adequate shelter before the wailing force reached them, so too would their lives. A glance at Dern confirmed his fears, and the two sped their mounts forward to catch up to the Ka-Ra and Cho'Gall. The chief and Arms-Master were searching a sheltered area of the leeward side of a large rock formation. Hassan had assumed they had heard the growing winds and were looking to take shelter, but Cho'Gall knelt near a blackened area, digging through the patch with a knife. It was the remnants of a campfire. Hassan noticed other signs of human habitation. Someone had camped here, but who? Not even the Khan Cho'Gall risked traveling the highlands while winter still held sway. Even the stone lords who lived year-round in the highlands locked themselves inside fortresses until spring's arrival. So who would have braved this deep into the outer rim to seek shelter here? That was apparently what his father and Cho'Gall were trying to uncover. For the moment, the wailing threat was forgotten as the mystery took hold of Hassan. He dismounted without a word and scanned the area, searching for clues. Dern joined him, and they fanned out to the outer edges of the camp, not already covered by the Ka-Ra and his Arms-Master. There were signs of more than a few people. The area was heavily trodden, and multiple sanitation holes were dug out past the perimeter. But there was almost no sign as to their identity. No refuse or items were left behind. It was as if they made a point of leaving no identifying markers. It was unnerving, to say the least, but then Hassan saw something that caused the hairs on the back of his neck to stand up straight. He froze in his tracks and stared at the discovery, trying to convince himself it wasn't what he believed. Among the multitude of boot marks and scuffs in the grit and dirt, one pair of tracks stood out. The feet were bare with no shoes or socks to distort the clear impressions of heel or toes. Hassan had some tracking skill and could tell the weariness and exhaustion with which the tracks were made. There was a drag in the step and a hesitancy in the gait from pain or weakness. Whoever left these marks walked quite a distance without shoes and was footsore and on the verge of collapse. There were dark blemishes that spoke of blisters or bleeding cuts sustained from the journey, and as Hassan followed the tracks out past the perimeter where they originated, his fears were only confirmed. "It's Avar," Hassan uttered to Dern with contained dread. "He walked all the way here naked and barefoot." "We must tell your father," Dern replied, not even questioning his pupil's assumptions. "I don't think he'll like proof he was wrong. I just hope he's willing to see the truth despite his pride." "If he wants to protect our people, he'll have to," Hassan responded, sharing his mentor's concerns. "But don't tell him what we've deduced. He'll take it better if he uncovers the truth on his own." Dern nodded in agreement, and they called the others back. Hassan glanced back and forth at his son and the old man, trying to read the hidden purpose behind their summons. Hassan pointed down at the ground and spoke. "We found a strange set of tracks you should see." The chief and his warrior stepped carefully around the footprints, analyzing the same clues. Hassan looked with suspicion, as if this was merely another ploy by his son to undercut his authority. It was clear their relationship wouldn't soon recover from Hassan's actions that day. Cho'Gath noticed the significance first. He knelt by the prince, testing the dampness of the dark spots with his fingers, then he gazed down the length of the trail towards the western horizon. He saw the truth. Hassan saw it too, but still resisted. He took longer to compile the facts and uncover their meaning as his face shifted from confusion to anger. Among those emotions, Hassan saw a glimmer of fear and knew the Ka-Ra was considering the possibility he'd made a mistake. He was naked and exposed. "Why didn't he return to the city?" Hassan muttered, half to himself. "He had men waiting here for his return," Cho'Gath answered. "Perhaps he feared the Archbishop's response if he failed." "What purpose does any of this serve?" the Ka-Ra asked no one in particular, as his mind waged with the strange series of events that harried his day. Hassan wanted to scream that he was right, that they should have killed Avar, but he thought it would be better for his father to realize his mistakes on his own. He only hoped the realization came before anyone had to face the repercussions of the error. "The others who waited here were armed," Cho'Gath added. "At least I saw signs of blades being oiled and sharpened. There was a whetstone buried in the sand. I can't think of any peaceful reason armed men would wait like this along the ladders. They were camped here for more than a few days at least." "Is there any way to tell which way they went?" Hassan asked. "The ground between the camp and the road was trampled too much. There's no way to tell. And any sign they left on the road was covered by our people when they moved through," Cho'Gath informed him. The Ka-Ra didn't acknowledge the question or look at his son. It was apparent he was seething at the prospect of what this discovery implied. Before they could return to their search, the howl of the not-so-distant winds reminded them of the approaching threat. A chill had taken hold in the air, and the sounds of shifting sand and grit were growing steadily more constant. "Do we dare risk weathering the storm here?" Dern asked. "We dare not risk these men returning as doubtful as it might be," Cho'Gath responded, then looked to the Ka-Ra. "Agreed," Hassan concurred. "We must reach our people this night. These men might pose them a danger, and I don't wish for them to face it unawares. We've no choice but to ride and trust our mounts can brave the storm." "Alewa is the wind," Hassan stated proudly. "She has no need to fear them." Hassan would grow to question the veracity of his claim in the chaotic events that followed. The roar of the winds drew close quickly, as if, at last, the ethereal beasts were unleashed. The star-filled sky vanished before an expanding wall of darkness creeping towards them from the west. It was a roiling mass of disgorged rock and grit, lifted by the blowing air mass like some behemoth of legend rising from the earth. The howls became shrieks as the winds navigated the tight channels between the stone outcroppings, always drawing closer. The first thrust of the elemental assault reached the party as they rode from the oncoming tempest. Hassan felt the fingers of air as they tugged at his clothes, setting them to dance and thrash about his body as if come to life. All he could do was tuck them tighter and hold on to the charging force of Alewa. The temperature dipped quickly, as if the approaching foe were drawing the heat from the world to fuel its rage. Hassan's panicked breath fogged in the air as the mild spring warmth vanished from the chill of winter's grasp. It was terrifying, and he felt his heart beating as fast as it ever did, battling for their lives in Anhara. But it was exhilarating at the same time. For a moment he questioned his sanity. There was an unexpected thrill with racing the coming darkness behind them, the thrumming beat of Alewa's hooves beneath him, and the surge of muscle and horseflesh exploding with every soaring bound. They flew through the highlands night with a demon board of nature's fury on their trails. They moved with incredible speed, but the winds and debris moved faster. The air filled with dirt and sand until they could barely make out each other, let alone the road beneath their mounts. Amidst the swirl of abrasive grit and dust that wore at the skin were large particles of stone not as easily ignored. Before long they all bore cuts and scratches, the onslaught of wind-borne shrapnel, until every face was streaked with blood, sweat, and grit, and dirt. Somehow they managed to keep going. The Duhar, born and bred for the harsh highlands, pushed on despite the forces aligned against them, and their riders managed to hold on through the cold and pain. The fiercest wave of the storm came on suddenly. The strengthening winds unleashed their fury, upending and tossing larger stones with cacophony as the air began to move the very earth. A cloud of debris eclipsed all remaining light, and the world went black. Hasan discovered in horror that he could no longer see the others. He drew rein, the panic draining any fragment of thrill that remained. The deafening wind shrieked past his ears, preventing any chance of hearing anyone calling. Unable to hear or see in the tempest, Hasan was helpless. Even Alewa was having difficulty standing up to the force of the gusts that assaulted them. Her stocky body anchored her to the ground, but she was fading under such a brutal pummeling. Hasan had almost given in to despair when a beacon of light appeared amidst the chaos. It was a familiar blue glow. He wasn't sure how, but the strange jellyfish light from Borwell's Inn was beckoning him through the darkness. He questioned his senses at seeing such a strange thing at such a time, but there was no other hope, so he directed Alewa and pushed on through the worsening fury. He hoped to see the light strengthening as he drew closer, a sign he was nearing his destination, but instead it faded with every moment that passed. He urged Alewa faster, frantic to not lose this lifeline. It was a race for life, and his heart was pounding as rapidly as the hooves beneath him. Then suddenly the wind weakened. It wasn't a complete subsiding, but for the first moment in what felt like hours, Hasan was able to discern faint outlines of objects around him. A large stone outcrop shielded Hasan from the greater thrust of the storm. He moved deeper into its field of protection, and more shapes came clear. He saw Dern and his Duhar pressed up against the face of the rock, the waning blue glow of the signal light fading away on the stone behind him. Whatever liquid produced, it was running down the stone in rivulets, slowly draining away its strength. A moment later, Hasan and Cho'Gha erupted from the raging fury into the small sanctuary. "Damn it, old man," Hasan announced with relief in his voice. "I don't know how you managed this, but I think you just saved our lives." "A simple thing, really," Dern replied. "I suspected our innkeeper friend had no longer use for his light, so I borrowed a few glass spheres on our way out." "Borrowed?" Hasan asked with mild amusement. "Commandeered," Dern offered with one of his roguish grins. He waved in dismissal and continued. "The chemicals in the lights can last for months as long as they're contained, but the light will remain dim. However, if you expose them to the air, they burn fiercely, but only for a short time. It was my only hope. Thankfully, it lasted long enough for you to find your way here. Well, your plan worked, it would seem. Perhaps I should appreciate more of these bizarre contraptions your friend tinkers with. That's twice now your innkeeper friend saved our lives with one of his weird inventions." It was a surprising mission for Hasan, but considering the strain of the night's journey, it was probably just an anomaly caused by stress. "What do we do now?" Hasan asked. "Can we ride the storm out here?" "I'm not sure," Dern answered. "The storm isn't likely to yield soon, and this rock is hardly adequate shelter." "Wait," Cho'Gha interrupted. He'd been staring out into the swirling chaos beyond the rock's shelter since they arrived. "I thought I saw something out there." "The sand is blowing too thick," Hasan countered. "No one can see a thing." "No! I think I saw a light," the arms master continued. "Did you use any more of those things? Maybe an orange one?" he asked Dern. "I used the only two I had here. None of them would glow orange. Maybe it was a fire." "There!" Hasan exclaimed. "I see it too." He pointed off in the distance at a faint glimmer of orange. "Do you think?" "It could be the others," Dern answered. "It could also be Avar," Hasan warned. "What do you think, chieftain?" Cho'Gha asked. "Do you think we can make it?" "We don't have much choice in the matter. We can't stay here. Be ready for a fight, though. At the very least, we'll have the advantage of surprise." They stared out into the darkness, each imagining what awaited them. After a short reprieve to gather their wits, they charged back into the storm. Once more they were assaulted by sand and pebbles. They shielded their eyes and pushed on, keeping sight of the orange glow in the distance. The shrill winds were now accompanied by a deafening roar as they tore the world apart. The earth shook from the onslaught. The Duhar fought on, barely able to maintain their footing. Distance was obscured and time felt as if it crawled. The light ahead faded and flared in response to the raging of the storm, making it impossible to deduce how much farther they had to go. The horses, exhausted from the night's run, began to falter. Hasan feared they wouldn't make it. Then suddenly the wind slackened, and a bit of visibility returned. The light they sought burned before them, strong and bright. Hasan nearly cheered at the sight, but before he could react, something hard struck his head and a sharp pain overtook his senses. The last thing he saw was the ground rising up to meet him as he collapsed from Alewa's back. The world vanished into darkness. His fear, his pain, everything was suddenly gone.